I'm the Reverend Bill Zelazny, and I welcome you to our Channing Memorial Church 2021 Summer Service Program. There are 28 or so Unitarian Universalist or Unitarian Universalist associations in countries around the world. Some were formed by American expatriates, but most are homegrown. They vary in size from a few families or one congregation to an association arrangement that has thousands of members. One of these associations is the Unitarian Church of the Khasi Hills in India, founded by Hajom Kissor Singh in 1887. It has almost 10,000 members in 35 congregations and 8 fellowships, and they also operate 25 schools in the region. Our presenter today will tell us about this branch of Unitarianism that has its roots in a tradition that grew out of the Hindu church. Today's chalice lighting is in the form of a prayer, originally written in Khasi by Dr. Klur Mukhim from the Unitarian Union of North India for the May 2021 Global Chalice Lighting Project of the International Association of Unitarian Universalists. Dear divine source of creation and of all enlightenment, may this chalice be lighted in your wonderful vastness to help us stay grounded in your eternal light and righteousness. We gratefully bow down to you for everything within and around us that has shaped our individual lives and is a spiritual community. May our souls find purpose, meaning, and peace as we evolve in our thoughts, work, and journey here, now, and beyond. Tom Howard is our presenter today. Tom is a member of Channing Church, and prior to moving to this area, he lived in several different cities, and in each he was a member of the Unitarian Universalist congregation in that city. Tom has just completed a term on the Channing Church Board of Trustees, and where he has served for 2 years as co-president. He is active in the community, teaching courses for the Circle of Scholars program at Salve Regina University. I present to you Tom Howard.
Today, I'd like to talk about a remarkable group of Unitarians in India. They number about 10,000 and are grouped in about 45 congregations. They are members of the Khasi tribe, and their homeland is known as the Khasi Hills, a range of low mountains up to 6,500 feet elevation that forms the northern edge of the vast delta of the combined Ganges and Brahmaputra rivers. Most of this delta is now the country of Bangladesh. The Khasi Hills lie just across the border in Meghalaya State, India. They run east-west and lie athwart the monsoon winds that blow north from the Bay of Bengal and across the delta. This elevation gain cools the moist air and condenses an enormous amount of water vapor, producing heavy rainfall, well over 400 inches per year in many spots. Compare this with 40 inches a year in Rhode Island. In this rugged landscape of forested hills, canyons, and waterfalls live the Khasis, and my background picture here is taken in the Khasi Hills. To explain who these people are, it may help to understand that India has its own Indians, that is, Indians in the American sense, indigenous groups with their own history and culture, hemmed in by a much larger dominant culture. In the case of India, the dominant culture is Hindu. What we know today as Hinduism is the product of a long process of cultural absorption, which began about 3,500 years ago with a series of invasions or migrations by nomadic herders from Central Asia, people who spoke an early version of Sanskrit. They came down into the plains of northern India and merged with the agricultural population that was already there, while trying to maintain their own dominance. One result was the caste system. As this society expanded east along the Ganges Valley and south into peninsular India, it encountered numerous Aboriginal societies, which were slowly assimilated to become castes, usually, though not always, low castes. This process continued through the time of British rule and into Indian independence. There are still unassimilated Aboriginal societies in India. The process was forestalled in areas where non-Hindu alternatives arrived first. These were chiefly Sufi Muslims in earlier centuries, and then Christian missionaries beginning about the middle of the 19th century. Far northeastern India is a good example of the latter history. The inhabitants of the hills were a variety of tribes who resemble the inhabitants of Burma as much or more than they do the majority of Indians. They had their own ancestral religions, but were evidently ripe for a change. The missionaries, many of whom were Americans, met with great success. Today, the tribal state of Nagaland, not far from the Khasi Hills, is 75% Baptist, which makes it more Baptist than Mississippi, where Baptists are only 55% of the population. In the state of Meghalaya, of which the Khasi Hills are a part, about 80% of the population today are Christians of several denominations. So the Khasis are not now and never have been Hindus. The Khasi language is in the same linguistic family as Cambodian and Vietnamese. It is not related to Sanskrit. Today, the Khasis are mostly Christians, but they had their own religion and a minority still follow it, similar in many ways to the religions of other small, isolated traditional societies around the world. Anthropologists typically classify these religions as animism or shamanism. Animals, trees, rivers, mountains, all are thought to have spirits who are capable of providing benefits or inflicting harm on humans and therefore have to be propitiated by various ceremonies and sacrifices. Behind or above all of these is often a supreme being. Uble is the Khasi name for this entity. Uble provided an entry point for the Christian missionaries who were able to tell the Khasis that they already had an idea of God, it just needed some refining. Among the Khasis, the most influential missionaries were Welsh Calvinists. Following what was usually the practice of Protestant missionaries, an early project was a translation of the Bible into the local language. There had been attempts to employ the Bengali alphabet for the Khasi language, but its reach was limited. The missionaries adapted the English alphabet and then opened schools. Among their students was Hajom Kissor Singh, who lived from 1865 to 1923, the son of a police sergeant in one of the local towns. At the age of 15, Hajom Kissor Singh adopted the Calvinist faith of the Welsh missionaries. But the introduction of literacy and Bible reading did not always go the way the missionaries intended. Singh became a questioning member of the church and began to doubt Orthodox Christianity. A British Unitarian named Margaret Barr, who lived with the Khasis sometime later, said this about him, quote, "He felt and declared that the message of election, damnation, and salvation was incompatible with the teachings of Jesus as he read for himself in the Gospels. He tried to persuade his fellow Christians that the essence of Christianity was to be found in Christ's way of life and scale of values," end of quote. It appears that for some time, Singh thought no one else in the world shared these ideas. Then, when he was 25, he met a member of the Brahmo Samaj, about whom in a minute, who told him about an American Unitarian minister in Calcutta named Charles Dahl, who seemed to have similar ideas. There was an exchange of letters, and Dahl sent a volume of writings by William Ellery Channing. Hajom Kissor Singh realized he was not alone after all. A word about the Brahmo Samaj, a group I've talked about before here. For 2 centuries, Brahmos have been prominent in Bengal as high-status Bengali Hindu reformers based in the big city of Calcutta. From its beginning, the Brahmo Samaj has had a connection with British and American Unitarians. The Khasis are a low status hill tribe. There would seem to be little connection between them and the Brahmos, yet in Shillong, which is in the Khasi Hills but was the capital city of the entire province of Assam under British rule, there were some Brahmos with civil service jobs in the provincial administration. How much influence they might have had on Hajom Kissor Singh, besides connecting him with Dahl, is an interesting question, but which I can't yet answer. Charles Henry Appleton Dahl, who lived from 1816 to 1886, had a long and varied career as a Unitarian minister in the US and Canada, and then as a Unitarian missionary in Calcutta. Dahl continued to send Singh encouraging letters, publications of the American Unitarian Association in Boston, and the writings of such luminaries as Emerson, Harriet Martineau, and Theodore Parker. Clearly, Singh had made himself literate in English as well as Khasi. Charles Dahl spent 31 years, the rest of his life, in India. He had a deep but troubled relationship with the Brahmo Samaj and founded schools aimed at the working classes. Dahl would be worth a talk in himself, but his importance here is in his effect in encouraging Hajom Kissor Singh, who was gathering friends in his home in order to discuss religious matters. Dahl's death in 1886 was a real blow to Singh, but he pushed on, and the next year held his first real church service, still in his home, along with 3 like-minded Khasi seekers. They were soon joined by people from nearby villages, including a pastor who resigned his position to join them. The American Unitarian Association did not forget Singh, but continued to send him material, including the Unitarian magazine. At this point, a new figure entered this story, Jabez T Sunderland, who lived from 1842 to 1936. He was a well-known participant in a theological dispute in the US known as the Western Unitarian controversy, another very interesting episode in our history, but that's best reserved for another time. In 1895, Sunderland was persuaded by British Unitarians to go to Calcutta to help resolve factional disputes in the Brahmo Samaj. He was successful in this and strengthened the Brahmos for a time and arranged for continuing support from Unitarians in Britain and the US. In the process, he met some major figures in the early stages of the independence movement and became a strong supporter. He was the first American to attend one of the annual meetings of the Indian National Congress, which under Gandhi and Nehru was to become the principal vehicle for the independence movement. In 1896, Sunderland undertook the journey, which was not an easy one, to the Khasi Hills to visit the Unitarians there, including Hajom Kissor Singh, with whom he had been in correspondence since the death of Charles Dahl. This was evidently a successful visit, since Sunderland is still regarded today by Khasi Unitarians as an important figure in their history. When he left, he arranged to have more Unitarian missionaries sent to them. Today, most UUs say theirs is not a proselytizing religion, but evidently this was not true 125 years ago. Sunderland was again in India in 1913-14. It is a bit surprising that the British administration allowed him in because he had become a vociferous American critic of British rule in India. He reissued many of his writings in a book titled India in Bondage. The title alone gives an idea of where he stood. After the 1913-14 visit, Sunderland never returned to India, though he is warmly remembered today by the Khasi Unitarians. He retired to Ann Arbor, Michigan, where he had previously been a minister in 1928 and died there at the age of 94. Back in the Khasi Hills, the movement continued to grow under Singh's leadership. He drew not only from the New Testament, but also from what he considered the best in the traditional religion. For example, Uble as an inspirational deity. The Khasi Hills Unitarians appear to be more theistic than most American UUs. In 1888, they adopted a statement of faith, which reads as follows, quote, "We believe, 1, in the unity of God, 2, in the fatherhood and motherhood of God, 3, in the brotherhood of man, 4, in love, union, worship, and faith, 5, in immortality." End of statement of faith. The statement appears to be still in effect. With regard to the second point, the motherhood of God, it should be mentioned that Khasi society is matrilineal. Ancestry and inheritance are passed through women, The youngest daughter inherits the family wealth and takes care of the parents in their old age. A more recent mission statement reads as follows, quote, "By worshiping one God, the mission of the Unitarian Union of Northeast India is to proclaim to the world the oneness and indivisibility of God, to bring light in the midst of darkness, to preach the religion of love, love of God and love of humanity, respect for all denominations in the midst of differences, respect for humanity at large, for all of God's creation, for the environment, are our core values. To bring about peace and goodwill on earth, to guarantee liberty, justice, and equality to all humankind, to encourage and promote the quest of religious truth through the worship of God and the celebration of life, to provide such spiritual care to our faithful that will help them grow in faith and belief, and to lead a life that is righteous, just, and worthy, rewarding, and to live by example." End of their recent mission statement. American and Canadian visitors to the Khasi Unitarians report a very lively and vigorous congregational life. Sunday services are long with a great deal of singing, and there's more than one on each Sunday. Each service begins with the congregation standing for the lighting of the chalice. Most of the day is taken up with church activities. Social action remains important too, especially regarding education. India provides public schools, but Khasi Unitarians are especially active in supporting or even managing them. They maintain an orphanage and provide an array of other social services in the more isolated villages. The large number of children and young people in the service has attracted the attention of visitors. So the Khasi Hills Unitarians are more than an odd curiosity in a distant corner of the world. They must be doing something right and might have much to offer to American UUs. They're not unknown, have attracted some attention in this country. Peter Morales paid a visit when he was president of the UUA, and the River Road UU Church in Washington, I found from Tim Phelps, has a partner church in the town of Mont Blanc and has sent a delegation there. I hope to make a presentation for the Learning Center later in the fall, when I will have more time and will be able to show maps and pictures that I have gotten from the people at River Road UU. Stay tuned and amen.
Each week now, we talk about the importance of financial support for this church. It is important. It is because of the gifts of our members and our friends and our supporters that we are able to provide our services, our summer services, our services all year long, and our many other activities. And I sincerely hope that you will help support this church by making a Sunday offering now or immediately after this service by going to our website, www.channingchurch.org, and then scrolling down on the home page to the Give tile. Click on that, and then follow the directions where you can make a one-time donation or a multiple-time donation. All of your donations to work of this church are vitally important and greatly appreciated. If you have found this service or our other services interesting and meaningful, come back next week. Come back next week to the same place on your computer. And also let a friend know about them and about Channing Church, and invite your friends and your neighbors and your relatives to check us out on our website, find out more about the church, our programs, and Unitarian Universalism. So now, as we go about our life, as we go about living in this next week, may we hear the melody of life and find ourselves singing harmony. May we feel it in our bones, and may we find ourselves dancing. So be it.